Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our weekly Bible study and our weekly prayer time here at Chatham Heights Baptist Church. I hope you are having a wonderful week, a beautiful week in terms of weather it has been, and I hope that it's been that kind of week for you in terms of your experience, whether working or at home or doing other things. We are going to finish up our study on the Sermon on the Mount today. And we are also going to talk about our prayer concerns, but we also wanted to highlight some things for you to kind of think about and put on your calendars and look ahead towards. We are publishing and sending out our newsletter this week, and the main article that I've written is about hitting the reset button on a lot of things. So, because a lot of times I get questions about when are we going to do excuse me, this again or that again. And those are fair questions. For the last couple of months, myself and the deacons have been talking about where do we go from here? What do we feel like we're able to do in a careful environment, I guess is the word I'm looking for. And so if the numbers of COVID cases around here continue to do as well as they have been, we're going to reset some things. First of all, we're going to reset worship. Sunday, June the 13th, we are going to go back to the way we had worship before a year ago. And 9 o'clock, contemporary service in the fellowship hall, 11 o'clock traditional service in the sanctuary. We're going to be going back to those types of two services to offer for you. We're also going to be live streaming both of the services just like we were prior to COVID, and we're going to be putting these services on our YouTube channel as well. Because we want them to be available to anybody and everybody, because not everybody does Facebook. Most of you do, vast majority do, and that's good. And yet there are some who the big connection is really with YouTube. So we will download those as soon as possible and get them onto our YouTube channel so you can watch them there. That includes those worship times. So on the second Sunday in June, we are going back to doing those particular services that we've become all too familiar with. Okay. The other thing then is often asked about, well, what about Sunday school? Well, we want to see how things go with the two worship services. And we want to continue to monitor the numbers. But if the numbers continue to do well again, then we are looking at resetting our Sunday school on August 8th, the second Sunday in August. And it would go back to its normal 10 o'clock slot between the 11 or you mean the 9 o'clock service and the 11 o'clock service. So I hope that you would be looking for that. But we're going to need help. We're going to probably need some help in leadership with teachers and supporters, helpers and aides and whatever for many of the classes, because not everybody will get to come back and to teach or do things because of the level of which they need to be careful in terms of the COVID-19. So, but we're looking to reset things then. And then if the numbers continue well, we're really looking and hoping to reset on the second Wednesday in September 8th, our midweek Bible study / missions evening at 6:30. Those, we're going to also need some help in terms of, determining that. Susan Dove's our missions leader, and Carolyn McCraw, her helper, and we're going to need some helpers in terms of seeing that we've got enough workers to offer for our young people the missions experiences that we have had for them in the past. Also, we are going to be doing a couple of other things. One thing you're going to see in the announcements is that we are looking to try to have Vacation Bible School this summer, and we are also looking to have our free yard sale. We've got a backlog of 2 years worth of stuff. We are looking for that date, and hopefully in the next couple of weeks we'll be able to share with you what the dates will be, because our plan is to have the free yard sale on a Saturday, and on the next day, on that Sunday, we will begin our Vacation Bible School Sunday through Friday, using that yard sale as a promotion to the community to come and join us in our VBS. We're going to need helpers for our VBS. Again, I can't stress enough how much, particularly those of you who have been vaccinated, to be able to step up to the plate and to help us as an assistant or as a gopher or a worker or a teacher or whatever. But these are all in the plannings, in the works, and I hope that you'll be praying about it, and I hope you'll be pondering what you can do to help with it. And I hope that you will see any opportunity for ministry and share that with us along the way. So there's a lot of resets taking place soon. So I hope that you will make note of that, write it down. Also, on Mother's Day, which is, I got to look at my handy dandy calendar on the wall, May 9th, we are going to be offering a child dedication service within our worship service to those families that feel comfortable enough to participate in the child dedication service. I know of one family that's already confirmed they will, but we're sending out word to others. We didn't get to do this last year, so you may say, well, my child's 2 years old. Yeah, well, that still qualifies, and we're looking forward to trying putting that together. So if there is, if you feel comfortable and would like to participate in that, we need you to let us know, preferably by the end of April, so that we have a way of getting this all together for us. So please mark those things down for you. Now, in our Bible study, I mentioned that we are on the last segment of it. Chapter 7 is the third chapter that includes the Sermon on the Mount, and it is the shortest of the 3 chapters, so it's going to be a little easier to get through this chapter, but it has some very poignant things that we want to remember. And probably, I would say, as much, many of the things Jesus shares in the 7th chapter are, many of these things are as convicting as anything else we have covered in our study along the way. So together we look at the first 6 verses in the chapter. Jesus continues his teaching, and he says, "Judge not, that you be not judged. For with the judgment you pronounce, you will be judged. And the measure you give will be the measure you get. Why do you see the speck that is in your brother's eye, but do not notice the log that is in your own eye? Or how can you say to your brother, well, let me take the speck out of your eye, when there is a log in your own eye? You hypocrite. First take the log out of your own eye, and then you'll see clearly to take the speck out of your brother's eye. Do not give dogs what is holy. Do not throw your pearls before the swine, unless they trample them underfoot, and then they turn around and attack you." Judging, Jesus reminds us, is a very dangerous occupation. Remember when we've talked in the Sermon on the Mount, the role that attitude plays towards our faith and our interaction with God and our interaction with each other? Well, Jesus is saying now that your attitude towards others is just as important as your attitude towards the sinful temptations of this world. Now, it doesn't mean it's you can just say, well, I don't need to discern things. No, it's not about discernment. The word being used is about judgment. We can be discerning without being judgmental. The approach of love is to serve someone else regardless of who they are. When God calls us to love one another, and that is in the greatest commandment, if you recall, then what we have to understand is, what does that love mean? Well, Mike, that love means I've got to point out to them their problems. Perhaps. How do you do it, though? What's the attitude with which you use it? With which you share such wisdom that you have uncovered? Well, that's a good question. Because the truth is, love, if you define it in some type of phrase that perhaps best describes it, love is seeking another's well-being above our own well-being. Seeking the best for someone else. The old adage was always, don't judge someone till you've walked in their shoes, but Jesus kind of says, well, if you just bother not to be judgmental, you won't have to worry about if you slip on their slippers or not. There are some things Jesus is pointing out here about judgment. And, some of the things are, I was reading a little bit and on Scott Nash's piece on the Sermon on the Mount, and he talked about in this particular verses some explanation to understand where judgment can lead us in a detrimental way. And he cites that some of the reasons Jesus is saying for us not to judge others is, number one, to judge others is irresponsible because it means that we believe we are able to judge and condemn all others. But my judgment will always be clouded by and influenced by my perception, my experience, my likes, my opinion. Well, Mike, that's not necessarily true. Well, I don't know. I mean, if we were to have a discussion about, I'm wearing my Bull County High School shirt that I got over the holiday, and about our schools and our favorite schools. And of course, for you, Bull County doesn't mean anything. It's Kentucky. But if we were to say talk basketball, Kentucky, North Carolina, Duke, whoever, I don't see how any of you can't support UK. I don't understand how you can't support Kentucky. And I judge you for that. Well, the truth be known is, I'm always going to be jaded and my glasses shaded in a way that makes me see the best out of whom I want to see the best and the worst out of those I want to see the worst of. So you can understand that judgment becomes flawed. Well, now we're talking about moral judgments, ethical judgments of other people. And that's even weightier than whose team is a better team to love or to like. And the way we go into people and into their lives, we can come judging because we assume things without investigating things. I ran across an interesting story. There was a huge formal State Department banquet, and this one particular fellow was seated in assigned seating beside a Chinese diplomat. And the guy didn't know how to speak Chinese, and he thought, how do I communicate to this? And so they had, the traditional first course of the meal, which was soup. And after a while, not having said anything to each other and assuming he couldn't understand me if I was in English and vice versa, I can't speak Chinese. I just assumed if I can't speak your language, you can't speak mine. He leaned over to the Chinese diplomat and he said, "Likey soupy?" And the guy just kind of looked at him. And he thought, well, that's great. He didn't understand the way that I made my English sound. So, okay. Well, not long after, the announcement was made for the guest speaker to come and speak. Well, it was that very Chinese diplomat. And he walked to the podium and he delivered impeccably so, and a speech in English that was better than the English used by the guy who was sitting beside him. The man had assumed that the Chinese diplomat didn't know English. He didn't ask him. And then when the diplomat, after his speech, went to sit down beside the guy who was sitting, who had been with him and made those assumptions, he couldn't help it. He looked over at the American from the State Department. He said, "Likey speechy?" Yeah. Assumptions without investigation are terrible instances where we have judged. Boy, in our age, think about all the things we hear by our ears or read somewhere online, and we immediately cast judgment and know exactly this has to be the truth. Why? Because it fits my narrative. And if it fits my narrative, it must be true. And so we turn around and we immediately judge that story, those people, that incident. And yet, if we dug deeper, we might discover we were wrong. Another reason for not judging is that, that helps us with judging is to come to understand that other people judging me doesn't matter either. Go ahead. I'm not going to live my life based on how you judge me. I will take your criticism, which is worthwhile, but it doesn't bother me. Louis Schmiedes, who was a great writer when it came to forgiveness, wrote an interesting chapter in one of his books. The book was entitled The Gift of Freedom. All the world's a critic, and you're tired of reading the reviews. And in that chapter, he wrote this: one of the fine arts of gracious living is the art of living freely with our critics. When we have the grace to be free in the presence of those who judge our lives and evaluate our actions, then we truly have understood Christian freedom, that my interpretation of who I should be and am in the name of Christ is not subject to your judgment assessments. That's a powerful thing to know and to remember. And we also need to understand that Jesus tells us you'll be judged as you are judged. Kind of see how that works. Let's see how that works out for you, right? Frederick Buechner did a wonderful job in his book Wishful Thinking, and he noted this. He said the New Testament proclaims that at some unforeseeable time in the future, God will ring down the final curtain on history, and there will come a day on which all our days and all the judgments upon us and all our judgments upon each other will themselves be judged. And the judge will be Christ. In other words, he wrote, the one who judges us most, finally, will also be the one who loves us most fully. Thank God for that. Jesus minds to be careful of using our sinner's eye to judge others. In verses 7 through 12, Jesus continued his teaching, and he said, ask, and it will be given to you. Seek, and you will find. Knock, and it will be opened to you. For everyone who asks receives, and he who seeks finds, and to him who knocks it will be open. Or what man of you, if his son asks him for bread, would give him a stone? Or if he asks for a fish, will give him a serpent? If you then, who are evil, know how to give good gifts to your children, well, how much more will your Father, who is in heaven, give good things to those who ask him? So whatever you wish that men would do to you, do so to them. For this is summarizing the law and the prophets. In a sense, it's like a charter of how prayer should continue for us. Ask, seek, knock. All of these phrases are written in the present imperative tense. It is a continuous action taking place. You keep on asking. And you don't stop asking just because you got your answer. You continue to go to the next question, to the next need before the Lord. Keep coming to God with your concerns, with your cares, with your thankfulness. We can't thank God enough sometimes. Continually, we come to God in good and bad times. with all things. See, we take that verse and we think, well, that's talking about getting what you want. That's not what it's talking about. It's talking about constantly going to God in our prayer and in ourselves in order that we become closer to God and dependent more on God. Well, God will provide what we need, we're told, and the analogies he gives is who has a child that asks for bread and gives a stone? Well, some stones, particularly those indigenous to parts of the Middle East, are kind of rounded like and in a place that when set out in the sun look like baked loaves laying in the sun. And they're not, they're rocks. So Jesus is pointing to something that makes very good sense. You wouldn't pretend that that rock is bread and then give it to your hungry child. That's just a horrible thing to do. Well, why do you think God would do that to you? You know, when you ask him for bread, God gives you a rock. You know, or if you ask for fish, God gives you a serpent or an eel. A lot of people think that it's probably an eel because eels were forbidden food under the Jewish eating rituals and codes. So the point is, God's not going to bring you what you cannot consume and will not offer you what is forbidden for you to have in the first place. That's an important thing to remember. Then verses 13 and 14, Jesus continues, enter by the narrow gate, for the gate is wide and the way is very easy that leads to destruction. And those who enter by it are many. For the gate is narrow, the way is hard, that leads to life, and those who find it are very few. Well, we're familiar with that term, the broad and the narrow gates, the broad and the narrow road. Someone once said of two popular rock and roll songs, if there's a stairway to heaven and a highway to hell, it kind of tells you what the traffic's going to be like on either, right? Well, the truth of the matter is that, you know, sometimes we have to realize our calling is to not be on a singular path, but a path that is going down the middle of traffic in the other direction, to be the salmon moving upstream, so to speak. That we are many times finding ourselves to have to go in the direction the rest of the world is not going, or those around us are not going to go. And that's what Jesus is getting at. Sometimes we have to walk in plain view the opposite direction. No, the rest of the world is telling us to go in this direction. We have to be able to discern the right course for us as God lays it out, and that's a difficult thing. I'm a big movie aficionado, you know that. I love movies. I love to look at some of the subplots of movies, symbolism, etc. In my younger days, one of my favorite movies was one of those action disaster thriller movies made by Irwin Allen entitled The Poseidon Adventure. And many of you probably are familiar with that, at least the kind of the premise story of that. Well, one of the main plot is the ship's turned over and there's a group of only 7 who choose to try to find a way to the engine room where the hull on the bottom, which is now the top of the ship, is the thinnest. And they might be able to find some way to break out of the ship there. Well, they go through some harrowing adventures along the way and lose some of the people to mishaps and misfortune in their journey. But they're the only ones who chose to go that way. Everyone else said, well, stay put, be where we are. And of course, you know their story. They drowned. But there is a scene even later in which everyone is going, trying to find supplies and then trying to find the way to the engine room. They come across a group of about 12 to 20 other survivors. They thought they were the only ones. And the doctor and nurse and others are leading that group. And they are going towards the bow of the ship, which our hero knows is underwater because of what has happened to it. But they just naturally instinctively go to the bow of the ship. And so the pressure builds. Are we going the right way, or are those people going to the bow going the right way? And there is real tension, palpable tension, that remains about, do we follow Reverend Scott? Do we keep going in that direction to the engine room? Or do we follow the crowd? Well, of course, they continue on towards the engine room, and we know the story. A handful of them survive. They are cut out by a rescue team that has landed on the boat, and when they come out, someone asks of the party, "Did you get any other survivors? Is there anybody from the front of the ship?" And they said, "No, there's no other survivors." Always thought that was an interesting scene. It plays out an understanding that the pathway is difficult. Sometimes it's running against traffic along the way. The narrow gate requires faith and discipline and integrity. Um, in looking at the narrow way versus the broad way, Harold Skinner once said, "It's not over at the edge of the broad way that the narrow way of Christ lies. It's right in the median, down the middle of the traffic." It's an interesting image, and I think it's very plausible for what Jesus was getting at. Then he continues and says, beware of false prophets who come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly they are ravenous wolves. You will know them by their fruits. Are grapes gathered from thorns or figs from thistles? So every sound tree bears good fruit, but the bad tree bears bad fruit. A sound tree cannot bear evil fruit, nor can a bad tree bear good fruit. Every tree that does not bear good fruit is cut down and thrown into the fire, and thus you'll know them by their fruits. And then Jesus went on to say, not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, shall enter the kingdom of heaven, but he who does the will of my Father who is in heaven. On that day many will say to me, Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name, cast out demons in your name, do many mighty works in your name? And I will declare to them, I never knew you. Depart from me, you evil doers. Jesus is pointing out the truth of who we are and how much Christ has impacted our lives will be revealed, first of all, by the fruit of what our lives produce. If our fruit bears anger, bitterness, resentment, even if we put the word righteousness by any of these things, if it bears that, those are not fruits of the Spirit. Nowhere in Scripture can you find them as the fruits of the Spirit, because they are not. And Jesus says the result is, if those are the fruits that you produce, you may come and say, I did all these great things. I did them in your name. I did it for you. And Jesus is going to say, I never knew who in the world you were. I did not know who you were. Who are you? But Jesus says, if you bear good fruit, fruit that he's already talked about in this, fruit that the Scripture reveals in other places, righteousness, love, joy, peace, forbearance, all of those fruits that are good, if they come out of who you are, then you have been connected to the tree that is Christ. You have borne the fruit of Christ. And Jesus will then say, look, I know exactly who you are, and I appreciate and I love what I've seen come out of your life. It's a good thought to remember about us. And the ultimate ending of this sermon is right here in the final verses of the chapter. Jesus says, everyone then who hears these words of mine and does them. Now, did you hear that? Every one of them who hears the words of mine and does them. It's one thing to hear, it's another thing to let it impact your life. Will be like a wise man who built his house upon the rock. And the rains fell, and the floods came, and the winds blew and beat upon that house, but it did not fall, because it had been founded on the rock. And everyone who hears these words of mine and does not do them, well, you'll be like a foolish man who built his house upon the sand, and the rain fell and the floods came, and the winds blew and beat against the house, and it fell, and great was the fall of it. Jesus wants us to know that we have to do what we have heard. We have to build ourselves on the life of the fruit of the Spirit of what we have been given. All these things Jesus has been talking about, chapter 5 and 6 and then 7, aren't suggestions. They're commands. They're not, when you get to it, would you act like it? No. They are to be observed now. To be observed here, today, in me. To continue to keep going back, even when I fail to be those things. And then I'll be like the one who, when things are traumatic, things are devastating, we discover we still have the sure foundation of Christ that we will live upon. Now, the second man he talks about, the foolish one, we think of sand, we think, who in the world does? Well, one of the images there is that any place near mountains, in Middle East in particular, there are what are developed called wadis. And wadis are trench-like riverbeds. And they usually only get filled up at the spring thaws, when the high mountains have, released all sorts of water from rains and snows and what have you. And they create flash floods that flow into those wadis. And the image is not that crazy. It's the idea that when you walked in, you saw this place and you thought, this is a nice, comfortable place to build my house. It'll flow on down that way and rough. And I mean, this is great. It looks beautiful. But we didn't take into account that there are wadis. And the river will come sometime. Maybe not today or tomorrow. But at some point, those floods will come raging down and will take the house out. Take us out with it. So we need to recognize that we have to do, not just know, these things that Christ has given us. And when Jesus finished these sayings, and the crowds were astonished at his teaching, because he taught them as one who had authority, not as the scribes did. This is the end of the Sermon on the Mount. And I hope that you get touched as I do every time I read through it, that you get convicted as I do every time that we examine ourselves in the light of what Jesus teaches us there. We have a blueprint, a guidance that we are blessed by in Scripture to help us to see the direction we should and can and ought to go. We have a lot of different prayer concerns that I want to bring to your attention today. I want to start with a fantastic praise. Many of you are aware that, Jimmy Wright, who's been battling a couple of things in his body that are just killing him softly, I guess is the best way. I mean, slowly and can, but he's continued to plow on through treatments and through things. And you remember a few weeks back that he had a very bad incident when his kidneys were shutting down, and he wasn't, it looked grim. He had one doctor and then doctors at Carillion that wanted to start him on dialysis. And, so he was going to see his nephrologist yesterday, Dr. Titus, in order to get some final answers, because his general practitioner was saying in the very near future you're going to need dialysis. The doctors had told him at Carilion he needed dialysis. Jimmy did not want to start dialysis. At least he didn't feel like he did. Well, today Dr. Titus, his nephrologist, his kidney doctor, told him there's no need for you to go on dialysis, particularly right now. His kidneys measured a 52 on the scale in which 60 and above is normal. So he is not far from normal function in his kidneys. Not great, but they're there and they're good. And there is no look or call for dialysis in the near future that can be seen or foreseen at this particular time. Maybe later, but for right now, no. So as you can imagine, Pat and Jimmy are on cloud nine, and all of us are excited about such great news. So we want to give thanks to God for that. Today, Charles Lewis is having a procedure for a heart defibrillator inserted today. So I ask that you pray for him as he undergoes that. Our Susan Dove Hampton had her second hip surgery yesterday, and it was very successful. She is now at home recovering, and we pray for that recovery to be a good, strong one for her and Bart to take care of her. We want to remember Shirley Hyatt. She had a report back from the heart monitor she had been wearing, and they are prescribing either to do pacemaker or defibrillator to regulate her heart. And she's waiting now to consider the best possible route, doing an echocardiogram and things like that. Jimmy Lewis, Charles's brother, is awaiting news and goes tomorrow to the doctor. He may be undergoing heart catheterization. I don't know if you're aware, but I don't think he minds telling it, that in the previous tests of a week or so ago, they discovered he had a heart attack somewhere down the line. So they're kind of looking at what may be going on there. Matt Fouts is still in Houston, Texas. They still have not received the full pathology report or the plan of action, but they're being very thorough. Matt told me today he was getting stronger in patience. He's had to learn that discipline. Hala said it wasn't working for her, but she was trying. But if you would continue to remember them in your prayers, lift them up. Continue to remember Paulette Martin, Tommy's wife, in the bone infection she'd encountered in the surgeries, and pray that infection is under wraps for right now. We want to also take some time to remember Dave Maddox, who's recovering from his replacement surgery and trying to get stronger and better over the time from that. Emily Gardner is recovering from her surgery. They put in some screws to her broken ankle down there in Winston, but she's doing pretty good, Lisa told me, and seems to be responding fairly well from that. Want to remember Jeff Riggin. He had shoulder surgery over a week ago and to repair a torn shoulder, and he's going through all of the recovery rehab stuff that he has to for that. We have some pending surgery. Carol Smitty having hip replacement. Or is it knee? I get my hips and knees confused lately. He's having that surgery right now scheduled for May 10th, if I recall correctly. Yes, I just consulted the handy-dandy wall calendar. So if you would please remember him. So many others from, I think about the Bedwell twins, and I think about Don Shermer. I think about all of these others that I ask you to remember Marianne James. She is I think doing some better, but she needs to get stronger and gain some weight so that some of this blood pressure dropping and blacking out thing doesn't happen as often. Remember the Turner family, if you would. Remember John Turner and Jay Turner. Please remember Barbara Honecker, and she still struggles with her breathing from some heart failure. So I just ask that you continue to remember her in your prayers. Right now, let us go to the Lord. Lord, we come first of all with hearts of thanksgiving. We're grateful for the news received for Jimmy Wright. We are grateful for some of these that we love that are on the other side of surgery or now are recovering and rehabbing. We, Lord, come to you and ask that you and your presence be with those who are still waiting to hear news on plan of action, procedures, on treatments, who are awaiting surgeries, who are looking to see what next they will need to undergo in their lives. Bless each one by touching them with your grace, O Lord, and lead us to be hands of grace as we reach out to them in your name. Amen. Great to talk to you guys today. Looking forward to Sunday at 10 o'clock here on the Facebook live page, or Facebook page, and later loaded to our YouTube channel. So I hope and pray that you will have a blessed rest of this week.